All right, welcome back to episode number 12. Today I'm sitting down with second year doctoral student Matt Hermes. And let's go ahead and start talking about what are you researching in the lab?
Sure. So I'm part of the Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab. So I'm working with Dr. Andy Fry.
Okay.
So Dr. Fry has done a ton in the realms of physiology, sports science, kind of married the two together and things like that. So the Athletic Performance Lab, it's broad. We do quite a bit of stuff, but my focus right now is I'm actually looking at different resistance training methods and how that might affect concentric exercise performance, things like that. So I just finished a project, actually finished data collection this past summer, and I'm still kind of going through all the numbers and all the data and stuff, but it's accentuated eccentric loading. So I had the opportunity to use some weight releases, but there's a few different methods you can use to achieve the AEL or the accentuated eccentric loading kind of phenomenon. But essentially what it does is it allows for heavier resistance during the eccentric portion of the exercise and a lighter resistance during the concentric. Typically we have the same load. Traditional resistance training is going to have the same load. It's all based on concentric maxes and things like that. Max out your bench, max out your squat. You do a percentage of that for your reps, right? But that might kind of not be the proper load maybe for eccentrics, right? We're up to maybe 150% stronger. Is that the right thing? Yeah. So a little bit stronger. We might have a little bit more force capabilities eccentrically than we do concentrically. So accentuated eccentric loading allows us to add that heavier load, so we might be able to get some of the benefits of loading the muscles heavier eccentrically, greater motor unit recruitment, potentially building greater amounts of strength and power, things like that, all the while still properly loading for the concentric, right? So if we were loading only for the eccentric, it might be too much for the concentric, and it might not get the desired effect that we want, depending on the exercise we're doing. So the way the weight releases worked for what I did, I was actually looking at the jump shrug exercise. Mm-hmm. So kind of a broken down derivative of the clean. Right. So they started with clean grip just outside the hips. Started from a standing position, bars at top of the thigh, and we had them perform the jump shrug across 6 different loads, and the loads are based off of body weight. I wasn't sure what kind of Olympic lifting background most of the people volunteering for the study would have. So loads based off of body weight. It was 20% of body weight, 40, 60, 80, 100, and up to 120. And they came in for 2 separate visits, one with and one without the weight releasers on the bar. And the weight releasers, essentially, they're little carriages that hold some additional load. We can load those things up with extra weight. They hook onto the end of the bar, and for whatever exercise you're doing, when you get to the bottom of the range of motion, they pop off, disengage, and instantaneously you have a lighter load on the bar. And it worked out really well. We didn't have any hitches or anything. They were able to seamlessly transition from down to up with the movement. And we were looking at concentric performance characteristics and things like that. So we loaded it up with an additional 20% of body weight. So on their non-weight releaser day, it was the same load down and up, 20 down, 20 up, 40 down, 40 up, so on and so forth. The extra 20% allowed for, 40 down, 20% up, 60 down, 40% up, so on and so forth. So they were able to load up a little bit heavier eccentrically. And we had them standing on a force plate, and got the force time curves, and we were able to look at a lot of different variables. But the big ones we were looking at were like mean and peak force, mean and peak power, eccentric and concentric rates of force development, as well as mean and peak velocity. And kind of what we were finding, I'm still kind of digging through the numbers a little bit, but it's looking like a couple of the variables might have actually enhanced might have been enhanced during the weight releaser trials, right? So the AEL, when they were under that accentuated eccentric load, mean velocity and mean power appear to be kind of enhanced or potentiated during the weight releaser trials for the 60, 80, 100, and 120%. So a little bit on the heavier end of the spectrum, but it looked like they were able to maybe move a little bit faster through the concentric range of motion, have a little bit higher power. Interestingly, the concentric rate of force development was actually higher only during the lighter loads, 20 and 40%, during the non-weight releaser trials. So we're trying to make sense of what this might all mean. None of the other variables were too affected. There was some minor enhancements in I believe peak power and things like that. Kind of as a whole, we look at the mean values across all the loads. The peak power, I think, was a little bit higher. The force remained the same. Peak force was not significantly different between one trial or the other. So I guess kind of what we're doing now is we're trying to make sense of all these numbers, right? So we've got, I guess everybody did. It was 6 sets. I think I had 15 people. They each did 2 conditions. We have a lot of reps that we're looking at, right? So the idea was that if we can, add this extra eccentric load, might they increase like motor unit recruitment, right? There's more force production, things like that. So it's promising. There's a couple things there, but it's yeah, I kind of lost my yeah. So we're still kind of digging through all of that to kind of see where we're at with that. But weight releasers, I mean, they've been around for a while, and they've been used. You see them fairly often with like the powerlifting community. They throw them on the end of the bar during their bench press and things like that. The research, there hasn't been a ton of research. I mean, there's some stuff here and there, some stuff over the years, but the research is relatively young in that topic. And this guy by the name of John Wagner came out of Mike Stone's lab at East Tennessee State. He's actually
like everybody's from East Tennessee.
they got a great program there. Yeah, they get a lot of guys coming out of there.
Because I think Tabor.
I think Tabor was too. Yeah. And Tim Sukamel was talking about that. He talked about that during his talk at the NSCA conference over the summer.
Waggle with the Royals.
Waggles with the Royals, yeah. So he's and they've looked at it quite a bit between or with the back squat. He's got a couple pretty solid papers out there. There's a nice review paper on the topic, and one of his papers though was looking at the back squat. There was essentially 4 conditions. They were doing, I believe it was 5 repetitions of the back squat exercise, and one condition was just straight set, so 5 reps, down, up, all the way through. Yeah, and that was the traditional set. And then they were also looking at cluster sets as well. So they had traditional straight set and a traditional cluster set group. And the cluster set was they would rack it between reps, and I believe it was 15 or 30 seconds. I don't remember the exact number. Take a short rest between each rep, and then 2 minutes between each set, something like that. And then they had what they called the accentuated eccentric loading straight sets, where only the first repetition had the weight releases on there. They do their first squat, boom, they pop off, and then they finish with the straight set. So 2, 3, 4, 5 reps without the weight releases. And then they had the accentuated eccentric loading cluster sets. So then they would have the weight releases on there, boom, hit their squat, re-rack it, put the weight releases back on, same thing for all 5 reps. So they had the weight releases on there. And there's a lot going on with that study, and they were looking across all the groups. But one of the things that actually really caught my eye was the AEL straight sets. So where only the first rep had the accentuated eccentric loading on there. Well, they saw some benefit on the concentric portion of rep 1. Right? That was the one that had the weight releasers on there. But also reps 2, 3, and I believe 4 were also potentiated without the presence of weight releasers. It's like, okay, there might be a little bit of a potentiating effect. So I think, down the line, I would like to look at, some exercises where maybe we do 2, 3 reps of an exercise, right, and see how that. But I mean, it's definitely promising that if force production, power output, velocity, things like that might be potentiated, there definitely might be some implications for how that might affect sports performance training. moving the bar a little bit faster. Might that lead to greater gains in force, strength, adaptations, and how to use that on the field?
Your main
Like
force is going
yeah,
in your head.
right. Yeah, producing more force, stronger.
And these, and again, just for listeners, the methods he's talking about right now, these are all advanced techniques, methods. This is not something you'd want to just jump in with like day one strength training. But basically, and then can you explain a little bit as far as the potentiation effect, what you mean by that?
Sure. So, I mean, the phenomena of post-activation potentiation, or if an exercise is being potentiated, it's where we might be able to temporarily improve level of force production or velocity or power output, things like that. Oftentimes, you tend to see a heavy strength exercise paired with a high velocity movement, squats and jumps all the time, right? Go a couple heavy squats, boom, go out, hit your big box jumps or hit your broad jumps or something like that. You might have temporarily increased levels of power, force, velocity, things like that. So it's a way to potentially get a little bit more out of your training. So the idea then is if maybe a heavy back squat can induce that, or when you're going to rack the bar, go do your box jump, to do your sprints or something like that, well, you might be able to potentiate the same exercise with the same repetition with the heavier eccentric load. If we have an extra 20 to 30% of whatever we're loading on the bar, potentiating, we might get more force production temporarily, and might see that force production go up, or that performance go up, whatever characteristics we're looking at.
All right, so we're back with Matt Hermes, and we're talking about accentuated eccentric loading, and basically, what the initial research has shown. So, can you talk about why it's a good thing for when you see these increases in mean force, when you see these increases in mean power, how does that apply to the field? Why should athletes care about that?
Sure. So, strictly speaking, we talk about like force production, like in the lab setting and things like that, and but we can loosely equate force and strength, right? So I mean, if we had an athlete on the force plate and they were doing a deadlift or doing a vertical jump or something like that, and we're tracking them over time and they're having higher and higher levels of force production, well, they're able to push the ground with a lot more strength. And we talk about ground reaction forces, ground-based movements, and things like that. Well, the higher the force, essentially the stronger the movement, the stronger they're playing. So I mean, it absolutely translates well to the sports setting, the field setting, and things like that. So if we can train and consistently train using or having higher levels of force, well, over time, the adaptations are going to come in the way of strength. Like that. We're going to see that.
So that's one thing I talk to athletes about is basically if you're stronger, you can wait longer to react on it. I think that's to their benefit. If they can read a play, wait a little bit longer to decide what they want to do, they're going to come out on top. So, but, even with endurance athletes, occasionally we'll talk with endurance athletes about, why should I care about strength training? All I need to do to get better at running is run, right? Like, well, if you're stronger, you're putting less energy into each stride.
Oh yeah.
Now you can save it for the end, or you can put more force in each stride.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and it's kind of the way I've seen it is, especially your endurance runners, especially with the amount of mileage and volume they put on their bodies already. I mean, getting them in the weight room and putting a little bit of load on them, whether it's deadlift, back squat, whatever, getting them under the bar and under some load. I mean, that's going to have implications for maybe like bone density and bone health. Mm-hmm. You see things like stress fractures and things like that pretty relatively frequently in runners and things like that. So I mean, strengthen them up from that standpoint. One, they're more efficient when they're moving, but also might have some injury prevention type as well. And
we were talking a few minutes ago about basically force velocity.
Yep. Oh yeah.
So one mistake I see athletes make if they're just in the weight room kind of haphazardly doing whatever is they'll only work on one portion of the force velocity curve. They're not working on the whole spectrum of training.
Right.
So could you touch on that as far as why does that matter? Why is that important?
Well, I mean, it's all situational. It's all depending on depending on what you're doing and things like that. So, I mean, the force velocity curve. I mean, force and velocity are the components that make up power output. When we talk about power output, as potentially being oftentimes looked at the most important athletic variable, right? You look at just about any sporting situation or any type of testing combine or anything like that, they're always going to have a test for power, broad jumps, vertical jumps, sprint, things like that. So, training multiple aspects of the force velocity curve, I mean, that's going to allow you to have both higher levels of force, higher levels of velocity, the components that make up that power. You're going to have higher power outputs. When we think about velocity-based movements, if we're going way to the end of the velocity spectrum, no load on the body, right? High levels of speed, high levels of velocity, not a lot of force. So that's like your sprint, your jump, right? If we only focus on movements like that, we're probably going to hit a ceiling relatively quickly, right? Same thing on the other end of the spectrum. We're looking at the high force movements. That might be your max squats, your max deadlifts, things like that. Where in relation to a higher velocity movement, it's relatively slow. Yeah. So, same thing. We can increase levels of force, but if we're not able to activate it quickly, then we're not going to, eventually win on the sporting field, right? So if we looked at the whole force velocity curve, we want to kind of shift both ends in a positive. That's going to come down to concept of rate of force development. And talk about East Tennessee State again. Mike Stone, he's a big rate of force development guy. He's done talks at NSCA on that. So rate of force development is a concept of how fast can we achieve our max force, right? So again, if we're using that high force example, say maybe a power lifter or something like that, I mean, they're boatloads of force, sure, but it takes them a while to get there, right? How long does it take you to do a max squat in comparison to how long does it take to do a max jump? Sure. So if we kind of marry those concepts of force and velocity, train them both at appropriate times. There's a time when we need to increase how much force we can produce. Then there's a time when we need to increase how fast we move. Well, we increase our force, we increase how fast we move, we can increase how fast we generate force, right? So it's like we can generate force relatively quickly. It's going to lead to more success on the field. I fall back on the example of football a lot because I played football in college and things like that. So even still, I played offensive line, so I go to the offensive defensive line example, right? So if you've got one guy that's stronger, well, if it takes him longer to reach his max force, even if the other guy's a little bit weaker, if he can get up to top speed faster, he's going to win, right? So boom, they get hit, they hit each other in the trench. Whoever can get to their top fastest is going to win. So, there's a time and a place for force, there's a time and a place for velocity, and when we increase both ends of the spectrum, how fast you hit that high force is gonna improve. Right, it's gonna lead to success on the field, things like that.
I think the best example I've seen, or at least I've heard, was from Cal Beats, where he's talking about, basically think of it like you've got a U. You've got one athlete who's shaped like a U, and then one athlete who's shaped like a V. So we want to create as many V-like athletes as possible, where those 2 points are closer together. If they're a U, it's slow and smooth. Whereas a V, now we're bringing that V closer together. If you're bringing that closer together, you're going to decrease the time it takes to develop high rates of V. And I was talking to some athletes the other day about, I can't even remember how we got on the topic, but basically talking about the whole points. What are the main points of training? Like one thing that comes along with training, one of many, is like you're trying to inhibit the training tendon, or you're trying to basically recruit high threshold motor units. How do you do high threshold motor units? Basically, you have to move a really light object really, really fast, or you have to move a maximal object. It doesn't matter how long it takes to get there.
Right.
But basically, do that.
Trying to move it as fast as you can still.
Yeah. And man, that's what Johnny was saying. Basically, over the time that Johnny and I visited, he essentially said, move things with the intent as fast as possible. Like, maximal intent is all that matters. Essentially. And
I mean, you see, again, you fall back on the powerlifter example. I mean, if you got a guy who's got 5, 6, 700 pounds on his back or more, um, goes down to full squat and he's in the hole. I mean, he's not going to try to come up fast.
Yeah,
He's going to try to get out of there as fast as he can, even if that takes him a second, 2 seconds, whatever the case is. It sounds like it's quick, but
that's a long time to be under a max.
Yeah, and I mean, just having that intent to move it as fast as you can. I mean, that's going to develop characteristics of speed and velocity and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, that's where the whole the concepts of kind of what you were alluding to, strength, speed, strength, things like that, right? There's a time and a place where we want to move something really light, really fast. Yep. That's increase how fast we move, right? Same thing, it's a time and a place where we have to load a little bit heavier if we still have the intent of moving too fast.
See, I think I like what you're saying about there's a time and place because, just as an example, I think people will follow. It used to be, football coach is now the strength coach. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, it shouldn't be that way anymore.
Right.
Go follow the bigger, faster, stronger programs. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with those, but that should not be the life of your strength training.
Right.
Your strength training should evolve over time, should change over time. It should not be the exact same thing you were doing 3 years ago.
Right.
You're doing now.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that people tend to lose sight on a little bit is adjusting the load and adjusting the velocity. Right. I mean, you get in a football camp in August or wherever, and I mean, you've got your pads on, so you got a little bit of resist, whatever load you want to say, but essentially it's body weight movements out, and you got guys smashing into each other. I mean, that's in essence the velocity end of the force velocity curve. So as we're kind of trailing your program off towards the end of the summer, I mean, you're probably going to be should be dropping loads with the intent of, moving the bar as fast as possible. Yep. And that's going to kind of get you ready for that high velocity type stuff. And I think, it's kind of where a lot of people tend to get caught up on like testing and numbers and things like that, right? Of course, max outs are important. Finding out where people are at, obviously, you gotta kind of assess your athletes every now and then, see where they're at. But I mean, if we're ending our summer with really, really, really heavy squats that we're moving relatively slowly, and then we max them out, well, are we truly ready for camp? Things like that. So, it's kind of a balancing act. Yeah, there's time and place for everything.
I don't know. Everybody gets all caught up in what's your 1RM? What's your 1RM? Well, I don't know. I look at the Russian research, and they're spending less than 10% of their time in 95% plus.
Right.
I mean, that's what I tell athletes so that they know, look, strength is built in the 3s, 5s, 10s, and a lot of them. Like, it's not fancy. Not a whole lot's going to change. You just got to add more load to the bar or add more sets or more reps or whatever. It doesn't always have to be this 1RM increase.
Right. Yeah. Because, I mean, when is that situation going to come up specifically on the field, right? I mean, it's we're going to assess, things like vertical jumps and sprints are probably a lot more applicable. Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at what a lot of people are doing now prior to coming into the weight room is if you have the resources, you have to jump on a force plate or a jump mat or something like that. And then you can kind of get a profile of where your athlete's at for the day. So I think probably testing more higher velocity movements probably a little bit more indicative of how your athletes are doing. Never mind, I lost it. Oh, yeah. The one thing that's becoming a lot more popular.
Hey, what's up, Gia? How are you?
Isometric thigh pulls, right? And it's a high force movement, but one of the most important characteristics of that is how fast can you get up to that top force? That's where rate of force development comes into play. So I think that is becoming increasingly popular. Of course, it requires some specialized equipment, things like that not everybody has the ability to get things like that. But focusing on things that are probably more velocity and like rate of force development dependent probably paints, I think, a better picture of where your athletes are at.
I don't know. I just look at those. I look at the testing just as a simple data point, just to see are we headed in the right direction or not. And another thing I talk with coaches about is, coaches will come and talk to us about, what should our programs look like? We'll educate them and give them some generalized ideas. Here's some things we should do. Basically, those data points are just as simple. Do I need to tweak or change one variable, maybe 2.
Yeah.
And I'll see that as a big problem right away that they're currently doing is they'll have 4 or 5 variables they're manipulating. And you have no idea what the hell works.
Right.
So you're like,
what? Yeah.
So you might have moved in the right direction. Your athletes might have got stronger. They might decrease the rate of force failure. But you don't know what you
right. Was it A? Was it B? Was it C?
Yeah.
I've seen it quite a bit where, like, physical therapists will, they'll maybe join a place like this, or they'll open up their own place, and it's kind of like touching on both sides of the athletic world.
That's one thing that we had that was really nice. We had a guy from Cirque Physical Therapy. Cirque's like this massive company, but the guy who was the clinic director here, his name's Nick Johnson. He was coming in every Tuesday to look at athletes, and it was great. Be like, hey, I don't know, that's out of my scope of practice. But go talk to Nick. He's way smarter than me. And I'll see that, and I think it's I think guys are stepping outside their zone personally, and B, it's like let someone else who's totally qualified do it.
Right.
It's a better marketing tool for you anyway.
Yeah. I think that kind of just builds up like your credibility and strength.
Because I don't know, too many people are just like they try to say like, yeah, I know. It's like, man, just say you don't know something. There's so much. There's a graph I ran across. Super Bowl called it Mount Stupid.
Okay.
It's basically how it starts. It's like, when you first get into something, how much you think you know.
Yep.
And then midway through, you're like, I'm an expert. And then true expert status is you realize how much more there is, and how much little you actually know.
Yeah.
And it's like people get caught on the peak of Mount Stupid.
And like I know, like Dr. Fry is great for like referring out or talking to other people, like even within like the few of us that we have in our lab group, right? It's like somebody might be more versed in this, somebody might be more versed in that. Johnny's done a lot with like EMG stuff, right?
Yeah.
So anytime we might have EMG questions, or if we're gonna we just picked up some EMG capabilities in our lab, so I mean, kind of help coach us up on all that stuff. But like, he'd be the guy to go to for that, or if it's like, if it's this or if it's that, he says it quite a bit, but I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's like, I know enough to know I don't know enough.
Exactly.
So it's like, all those little sayings that it falls back to. It's like if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And stuff like, it's like, it's funny, but it's true because you're not going to be the best at everything. It's like you got a guy who's good at this and that. It's having a team approach.
Yeah.
I mean, and that holds true in just about every field you're going to go in. People talk a lot about like, if it's like an MD or if it's a PT or if it's a strength coach or whatever, they can refer out. They're probably doing their job correctly.
Exactly.
Same thing in the research with the academic side or whatever you come across. It's always good to build those connections and relationships.
Yeah. So, next thing I want to get into is your research was on squat, right?
Well, we actually did the jump shrug.
Who did the squat, the quarter squat?
Oh yeah, that was that was through athletics, and that was Corinne Bailey that was kind of heading that up, and Dimitri helped out with that. Put the poster together for the NCA Kansas clinic.
What was funny was that the first mentor I had, named Jason Roberson, he's the head guy at Ball State.
Okay.
And when I happened to be home prior to that NSCA conference, and he was talking about some experimenting he was kind of doing with, like, in the weight room with basketball, about having some of them quarter squat.
Yeah.
And then I went to the NSCA conference and then ran into Dimitri and Corinne. And I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it makes sense from every aspect.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you look at like, basketball, college settings, 30-some games or more, higher levels, you're talking 70, 80 games, depending on the league and things like that. I mean, it's a long season. It's a long time. It's a lot of wear and tear on the body. I mean, you're not going to go in and trash the guys in the weight room, especially if you got 2 or 3 games in a week or something like that. So I think that was the idea with the half squats. Like, okay, if we can track, force output, we can track work and things like that. Like, are they putting in the same amount of work? We load the bar a little bit heavier, but we only go halfway down, things like that. And I mean, typically speaking, depending on the athletes you have or the athletes that you're working with, or whatever, like, the goal isn't, probably not to, increase strength and force substantially in season, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people say maintenance or whatever you want to call it, but I mean, you're not going to go as hard in the weight room in the season as you are in the off season. Exactly. So if you can work, work in a way that's going to hang on to some of the stuff that you grab in the off season, you can grab onto that, hang on to it during the season. Well, one, that's going to help your performance in season, right? You're able to perform well, you might outlast other people and things like that. But it's also going to give you a better starting point after the season. Every year you want to step up to the next level and things like that. So I mean, if you can hang on to those, adaptations and things like that, set you up for more success. So yeah, that's where the half squat comes into play. It's like it's not going to trash us not as much as a full squat would, but we can still get some great force and work done and things like that. And in a way, squat's great, but it might also be, depend. I got to look at more research on it and things like that, but it might be more relative to a jump and things like that. Your counter movement, or even you look at the way a basketball player is going to jump for a dunk and things like that. I mean, they dip a little bit, but they're not going full squat, or they might not even dip as much as they would if they were testing the counter movement jump. Right? Yeah. It's just a quick boom reactionary thing. So if you get a quick boom boom with a squat, move it relatively fast, that might trigger some of the same responses as you get when you do a jump for a rebound or something like that or whatever. So I definitely think it fits in well.
Has merit,
Yeah.
I think for people who know me, I mean, it almost sounds blasphemous. Like you mentioned
half squats.
Half squats.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Kick you out of the weight room for that, right?
But, I mean, like I think there's still like Coach Robe is still having full squat in their warm up. Still having full squat afterwards. Because I know a lot of basketball sport coaches out there will say, why should I full squat them anyway? They're not doing it in the game. And I would argue, for ankle, knee, hip health. I mean, for general strength.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's going to carry over to so many other things. I mean, Dr. Fry we were talking about. I think it was a study that they did, a while ago. I don't know where he was at when he was doing this, but it was kind of like a full squat versus the half squat kind of study, right? And strictly speaking, the one group that did the full depth squats, well, they got stronger at full squats and at half squats. Yep. Whereas the half squat group, they only got stronger at half squats. They didn't have any change in the full squat. But so I mean, yeah, if you're talking off season, you don't have the stress of competitions and practice and everything else under the sun. Well, yeah, you're going to full squat your guys or the best you can with that, things like that. So, but if we can use that to maintain whatever force and power production we have, if it's still going to put enough stimulus on there that you're not going to lose it, it's going to save your guys' legs, it's going to save, you're not going to lose fatigue and things like that. So.
And something I've heard from Dr. Israel is he was talking about basically, I love the way he says it. He says there's a minimum effective dose. So what's that minimum effective dose in season versus out of season? Then the other thing that I heard from him, I believe, is talking about deadlifts, squats. Those are all great things, but just know whenever you're programming that those are systematically expensive exercises.
Yeah.
And I like that term is like, so if you have $100 to spend, there goes $50 right out the window.
Right. Yeah.
So make sure that it's money well spent, so to speak. But
yeah. Well, and was sitting in an exercise physiology class with Dr. Fry a couple of weeks ago. We were doing our group discussion on a couple of the articles that he had us read, and one of them, was the performance adaptations, and I mean, they were talking about like fiber type changing in the articles and things like that. But I mean, they were also having measures of strength and power, and it was a relatively untrained population, but they were noticing adaptations from that standpoint over the course of about 2 weeks. We had another paper, and it was a different subset of people and things like that. But In addition, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was the maintenance of previous adaptations. It was like a train, detrain, train study, and it was like after a couple of weeks, the group that detrained for, I mean, it was something crazy. Like they detrained for like 30 weeks or something like that. So it was, you gotta find a group of people.
Someone willing to be lazy.
Don't do anything for half the year, right?
Yeah.
But they
We'll pay you lots of money to not do it.
they had like a 6 or 8 week, I think it was, training period before they detrained, and they had significant adaptations, and of course they lost adaptations during that training week. But then after just a short period of time, they were able to significantly increase the adaptation or the performance test that they were testing and things like that. So, kind of my thought with this, and I mean, you got to kind of take it at face value because I think they were working with untrained population,
Sure.
things like that. Like highly trained athletes versus like an untrained general population. Well, yeah, you're going to get different results, right? But strictly speaking, they were able to have some sort of adaptation in one group in a couple weeks, and then they were able to kind of hang on and re-grab some adaptations they lost after the reintroduction of strength training. And it's like, I was thinking, is there a way that you can kind of marry those two concepts, right? It's like, okay, if we're in season, if it's a runner, or if it's a baseball or basketball player, something like that, you might have multiple competitions in a week, or have your practice schedule, whatever the case might be. It's like, how long can we go before we lose those adaptations? Like, can we strategically place a session in there, here and there, with the intent of not stressing the athlete too much, but enough to hang on to what we have before we lose it.
Yeah, so, I think you can. I mean, I've seen that with like the residual effects of training. I remember a table from that triphasic training book where Dietz is talking about, residual effects of speed are 5 days plus or minus 3. Yeah, residual effects of strength are 30 days plus or minus 5. And basically, when the athlete needs to peak, you can structure those.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you can technically train strength, although it will feel heavier, it still should have the qualities
right
that built.
And so you can definitely, plug training in proper times to maintain or peak and things like that. And I mean, that's the interesting part about, I don't know, I think it's fascinating, the long-term programs that people design for athletes. And it's like how different it can be, from sport to sport, things like that. You look at like a sport like football, 10, 12, 14, whatever, however many games you have in the season. It's like, well, how different that can be versus it's like, okay, like you've got your track runners, and I mean, they have meets throughout the year, but really, boom, conference championships, nationals, whatever the case is, that's where you want them to be. So
that's where I get into it with athletes, and they'll tell me like, hey, I got this competition coming up, and usually my first question is, how important is the competition?
Yeah.
Because, they look at you so weird because they're like, every competition.
Right.
It's like, because if you were to watch, for example, an Olympic weightlifter, they just need to qualify for the next event.
Right. Yeah.
They don't necessarily need to win.
You see people not necessarily holding back, but like, it's like, okay, what are the numbers? What do I got to hit? When are you going to be in top form? Things like that.
And these athletes, like, for example, one of my big gripes with sport coaches is they insist on these kids specializing too soon, and they insist on them playing year round. The problem there is, okay, now we're taking this kid and we're saying, okay, I want you to know that all these competitions matter. The problem is, like, you can't peak for all these competitions.
Right.
Not equally for club, or school, or your travel team. You just can't do it whatever. I mean, like a regional competition for your school is going to be more important than your fall ball.
Right.
Where you're going to play 4 games that are not even. What's the point?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and that's kind of the the way I view it with like sport like wrestling too. It's the same thing. Yeah, I wrestled in high school. You have dual meets every week. You have a competition every tournament every weekend.
So you didn't specialize when you were 8 years old?
What's that?
You didn't specialize.
You're right. Yeah. No, I have
Played
played as much as I could.
Yep.
I think in middle school, I played I think five sports.
That's awesome.
You know, and I mean, was I particularly good at a lot of them? Not necessarily, but I mean, you know, it's not the fact of that, but like one, it gives you a specific break from all the exact movement patterns that you're constantly doing in one sport. Mm-hmm. And you know, are there sports that you know there are absolutely sports that are going to be a lot more physically demanding than the others, and I mean, you see it quite a bit with like baseball, right? Yeah. And you know, I love baseball. Baseball's awesome, sure. You know, but especially pitchers. But it's true for all athletes. But you need a break. Yep. You know, if you're throwing, you know, however many pitches every single day, and you know, you got your summer league and you got your fall league, and then you got, you know, they're not all equally right. You know, and that's when you see what, like 16-year-old kids having to have like Tommy John surgery. Yeah, that should never happen. Right? But and
I would just contend that like these kids, like they just cannot maintain that level of, you know, I mean, it has to be draining.
Oh yeah,
to go to a competition.
Well, and you need just, whether it's from a different sport or something like that, but you know, you need time off. Yeah. You want to talk about like certain, you know, responses to training, and you know, what about like stress responses, right? You know, and you've got like maybe a elevated cortisol levels after a hard practice or a game or something, right? You know, if we're constantly in that state, and it's okay, and going from season to season to season in the same sport, it's constant, you know, like we're at that elevated stress level for however many months out of the year, like what does that actually do? Right. You know, and you know, whether it's a different sport or whether it's just straight up time off, like it's important because you're doing the same movement pattern over and over and over again every day in practice. Well,
you can only get so good.
Yeah, it's you'll kind of hit that ceiling and a lot sooner.
The other thing too is like, you know, if you're so good at a sport, for example, I think Kevin Durant is taking this season off. I would guess that he's going to be better than he's ever been next year because he's had a full season off. And he's not going to forget how to shoot a basketball.
No. And yeah, I mean, strictly speaking, he's probably going to be shooting a basketball, right?
He'll shoot a little, but he won't forget.
No, and he's not like going all out every day.
Yeah, exactly. He's not going as hard as he can.
These movement patterns, these motor patterns, I mean, they become relatively ingrained.
Stick around.
You know, I mean, you're going to have to knock a little rust off when he comes back for it, but, you know, it's not like he's going to forget how to play basketball, like you said.
Yeah, I see the same thing with, it was LeBron last year with the groin, and he's probably going to have a better year this year than he's ever had because, for God's sake, they've never had rest. And I just wonder, you know, with these guys that are having these injuries, whatever they are, like an Achilles, how many miles do they have on them by the time they get to the league?
Yeah. You know? Yeah. I mean, you're talking what, like, for sure, 4 years of high school, some guys, a couple years of college, whatever, but you know, how many, AAU and youth league and this and that and the other thing. Yeah. I mean, you're seeing it more and more where sports are becoming a year-round thing, right? One sport is becoming year-round. I mean, just from the rest standpoint, yeah, it's important, but also play multiple sports. There's going to be movement patterns and skills that you're acquiring from those sports that you might not necessarily see in your other sport. You know, is it a way you always move in your other sport? If it's your main sport, maybe not, but like, I mean, it's definitely going to translate to, more ability on the field. You know, you take some time off from, you know, I played offensive line, like, holy cow. And there's a lot of pounding, a lot of, you know, the knees would get kind of sore and things like that. You know, you move on to another sport for a little while, that might be less impact or something like that. And I mean, yeah, you're going to obtain movement patterns and abilities that you don't see, and it gives your body time to rest from those specific demanding exercises or movements that you get day in, day out in your foot practice. So, yeah, you know, you can never stress it enough. And it's there's research that backs it up quite extensively that specializing too soon, not the right way to go.
Man, I was talking with a girl the other day. She's verbally committed to play soccer at a university, and we were talking about she doesn't feel like she wants to. I said, "Oh, you didn't sign anything? Nothing, no shame in admitting." I mean, and she's been playing forever.
Right. It's the same thing. What was it recently? A couple weeks ago with Andrew Luck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The guy's 29.
I can't blame him.
Probably been playing football since he could walk.
Yes.
And was he probably 6, 8 years? I don't know how long he was in the league for, but I mean enough to he at that point he wasn't playing for money. It's when it's time, it's time. Like he's 29. I don't know if he's got a family or anything, but I mean if he's going to start a family or whatever, I mean you're going to want to be able to do things. Can you walk? Can you move? So I can't blame him one bit.
And that was hard for me being a Colts fan seeing
Oh
it.
yeah.
But I totally get it because dude, he had a lacerated kidney. He had what was it, an Achilles, a shoulder. Who knows how many concussions that we actually know about versus not know about.
Yeah, I mean, it was. Well, I remember a few years ago, Wisconsin Badgers fan. It was Chris Borland, was a linebacker for the Badgers. And I think he played a few years in the NFL for the 49ers. And I think he retired due to concussion-related issues after like 2 years in the NFL. And it's like, yeah, I don't blame him at that point because you want to, we're learning more and more about all the things related to traumatic brain injury and all the later down the road issues people are running into, and it's what's more important to you, quality of life or playing for a few more years of your sport. So yeah, I never cast any blame on that for those people.
Anyway, he's cool.
Yeah,
I mean most of these guys, and that's why I tell people is like, especially the young kids that think like. Because I get a lot of athletes who are like, "Hey, I want to do what you do for a living." Okay, but make sure if you want to do it, cool. Make sure you get an environment where there's someone who wants to teach you. Yeah, and they're open and willing to teach you, not like my way or the highway. Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and that's where you got coaching staff with multiple people on there, and it's like everybody should complement each other, right? And it's like one person might be great at this and great at that, and they all bring different things to the table, and it's just like building that tool bag. Yeah, you got more tools in the bag you can use to build your athletes up and whatever. And and I think that's the biggest thing, kind of going into the strength and conditioning field. It's always that willingness to learn and adapt and everything. Because when it comes down to it, like you said, like people are like, I'm an Olympic guy, or I'm a powerlifting guy, or I'm this, or I'm that, or whatever. Well, in all reality, I think the only athletes that have to do certain exercises are weightlifters or powerlifters, right? Because that's their sport, But you take a football player, or a volleyball player, or whatever it is. Like, do they have to back squat? No. Do they have to deadlift? No. Exactly. There's a million ways that you can increase their strength, their force production, their ability to move and exert force during these movements and lifts and things like that. You see a lot of guys or a lot of places that like the belt squats and the pit sharks. And, I mean,
it works.
Yeah,
makes your legs stronger. Cool.
Right. Can you jump higher? Can you run faster now? Can you play your sport better? Well, then you accomplish your job, right?
I don't know why everybody gets romantic about like, oh, you have to back squat or you have to deadlift. And there's a kid the other day, I could tell something was wrong. Like, he just didn't feel right. And I said, what's wrong? He goes, oh, my back hurts when I squat. Why didn't you say something?
Right.
Like, here, rack it. And we came over here and did a front foot elevated split squat. Because nobody, like, you're never going to hit someone on the football field and someone goes, holy shit, how much do you bench?
Right.
Like, who cares? Like, that's never going to happen.
Right.
And if someone is asking you that, their mind's not in the right place anyway.
Right. And it brings up the idea that gets talked about a lot is there a point where an athlete's strong enough?
Right. Yeah.
And like why do a lot of people use the back squat? Well, I mean, you can load a fair amount of weight on it, right? Mm-hmm. Get your athlete under a lot of weight and exert a lot of force. But at the end of the day, if you've got a guy that can squat 1.5 or 2 times his body weight, and it's like, well, if he's a double body weight squatter, well, there's probably a lot of other things you can focus on, right? Because you kind of hit that ceiling, and those returns aren't as big, and it's like, okay, we went from 2 to 2.1 times body weight or something. It's like, is that significant? Right? Maybe not. I don't know. But like at the end of the day, you squat a certain point, let's focus on power, or let's focus on speed, or like how can we utilize that strength better, and things like that. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who say there's no such thing as strong enough, but eventually you're going to start banging your head against the wall, right? But current research, focuses and things like that. We've got a big study that we got going on now where we're looking at different loads and volumes of strength training and how that's different, both performance-wise and within the muscle and things like that. So, got a real high load, low volume program that one group will do, and real low load, high volume group. Same exercises, different loads and intensities and things like that. Seeing how the responses are different. And so that's the big thing we got going on in the lab right now. There's always stuff going on there though. So, but as for social media and things like that, I am on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But I don't think I have any fancy handles or names or anything like that. So I feel like a little behind the times when it comes to social media. Sometimes, yeah, I think you can just go in the search bar and look up Matt Hermes, and I should pop up.
You'll be the guy push pressing a lot.
Trying to, right? Yeah. In ResearchGate and things like that, I'm starting to get out there with certain things like that. So I'm on there. I got a couple things on there right now. Some stuff we did with repeated jumps in the lab. We did a couple posters at NSCA on that. So that was interesting. How power and fatigue change over the course of repeated jumping and things like that. Yeah. So that was a protocol that we adopted from a former doc student in our lab who's now at Northwest Missouri State. It's Eric Mosier.
Okay.
So it was similar. It's like a modified Bosco test. Yeah, it's a Bosco test. It's what, hands on the hips, drop to 90 degrees every time, and forcefully jump as high as you can for a minute straight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this one was 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off for a total of 10 sets. I believe the test ends up being about 5 minutes in length. Trying to get as many jumps as you can in that 15-second window. Right? So it's like a modified. You get a little rest, recovery, and things like that. But yeah, we did a little bit of a project with that where we had some neuromuscular testing that they did beforehand. We took some blood pre and post jumping protocol. So there's a lot of moving parts of that program. I kind of focused on the performance aspects of it, and we were looking at. There's a lot of stuff that we were getting, but what I presented on this past summer was like the takeoff and landing force as well as peak power output, and in the same instant, we also did amortization and rates of force development.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very, very, very fatiguing protocol. I can definitely tell you that.
You said 10 rounds?
10 rounds.
Yeah,
and just maximal repeated jumping. By the end of it, it's almost feels like you're not even leaving the floor. You couldn't slide a sheet of paper underneath you, right? But so of course, force production and power output are dropping off dramatically, right? And that's kind of intuitive. But what was very interesting is that the rates of force development and the amortization, the amount of time for amortization did not change from beginning to end. Like scratching our head, like, how does that work?
Yeah.
Right. And unfortunately, we didn't, sync everything up with video. It would have been cool to have some videos of this because then we can probably really tell what's going on. So I can't say for certain, but kind of what the thought is what happens when you get fatigued? Well, form and technique changes a little bit, right? Well, Mike Stone, I feel like I said that name a couple of times, right? A number of years ago, published some research on what's happening form and technique wise during a repeated jump protocol, and it was the 60-second. I think it was the Bosco test. So
jumping for 60 seconds.
Yeah, and form changed quite a bit. So what they found is that there was a whole lot more hip flexion. So they were leaning over more, less knee flexion, more vertical shin. So they were bending more at the hip, bending less at the knee. They weren't hitting depth, right? So my assumption is that's kind of what was happening, right? So, okay, they weren't hitting depth, so that's why things like rate of force development and amortization were maintained. If they stayed with that form and technique, I'd imagine that, how quickly they were producing their force and things like that probably would have dropped significantly.
So you mean it's maybe not a good idea to do snatches under fatigue?
Yeah, that's a great application of that, right? Yeah, why would we not want to do these high velocity, high power movements, especially with load? Well, are we going to be able to maintain that form? Yep. You got exercises that are very form and technique driven that otherwise are relatively safe.
Sure,
but man, you're not going through proper ranges of motion and movements. There's definitely risk. So high volume Olympic lifting or just high volume power movements and things like that probably not the greatest thing to do. But yeah,
well, cool, man. Well, thank you very much for being on. I appreciate your time.
Anytime.